You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and for the first time since, I think, the Mookie Betts trade, I'm going to talk about a baseball trade. That is right, I don't want to say big one happened yesterday, but it is notable. No question about that. The Royals traded Tim Hill to the Padres for Ronald Bolaños and Franchy Cordero. Hill is a solid lefty reliever. There's nothing wrong with him. Just a solid player. He gets lefties out efficiently. In his career, they're hitting .211 against him. And righties don't have a lot of success against him. They're hitting .259 against him with 7 home runs. I don't like the 7 home runs, but the .259 average for a lefty isn't terrible. Hill's a solid lefty reliever. Nothing wrong with him at all. Moving over to the other side of the trade, and I'll start with Bolaños. He came up to the majors last year for the first time. He pitched in 5 games. Didn't look that good. He went 0-2 with a 6 ERA. But I thought he was rushed up to the majors. I thought the Padres were just really itching to see what he could do. The stats don't show it, but this guy has tremendous stuff. This guy can throw any type of fastball he wants. A fastball that sits in the low 90s to a fastball that's going to go to the high 90s. His fastball can cut, it can sink, it can rise. This kid throws like 5 different fastballs. It's incredible. Hitters are going to have a really tough time picking up his stuff. He's trying to develop off-speed pitches. He's got a decent curveball and a decent slider. I'd like him to focus on the fastballs, though. I think if he just masters his 4 pitches, his regular 4-seamer, his cutter, his rising fastball, and his sinker, he's probably not a starter in the next level, but he's definitely a reliever if he goes that route. But the Padres are trying to stretch him out as a starter. Nothing wrong with that. I just don't think it's going to work. I think his likeliest landing spot is in the bullpen, possibly as a setup guy. It's possible he could turn into a 7th inning guy. I don't think he's ever going to be a closer. I think he's likely ticketed for the pen in the bigs. And Cordero was once a very highly touted prospect, but when he was up in the show, he was never able to contribute. He has a career .240 average with only 10 homers and 29 RBIs, and this is going to be his 4th season in the majors. To me, he's just a quadruple A guy. Really nothing special about him. Sometimes these big prospects pan out, and other times they don't. He's one who's not going to pan out. I'd be surprised if he made much of an impact for the Royals this year. Ultimately, this trade boils down to Hill for Bolaños. As much as I'd like to say that one team won it, I think this is an even trade. According to Baseball America, Bolaños was the 13th best prospect in the Padres system. I think that's a fair ranking for him. The Padres have an incredibly stacked system. On a bunch of other teams, he'd be in the top 10. And Hill is a really good lefty reliever. He's cost-controlled for a while. He's not even going to be arbitration eligible until 2022. He doesn't hit free agency until 2025. And I don't want to hear that the Padres didn't need a reliever. In a 60-game season, anything can happen. The Padres are going for this thing. They're going to try to make a run. I commend them for it. Lord knows they spent enough money. A.J. Preller's an aggressive GM. He's proving it here. I don't begrudge him at all for making this trade. The price was right. This is an even trade. Moving on now to the really sad death of Tony Taylor, who died yesterday at the age of 84 from complications from a stroke. It's okay if you don't know the name Tony Taylor. Not the most household of names. Even in Philadelphia, unless you're an old school Phillies fan, you probably don't remember him, but you should, because this guy was one of the better second basemen in all of baseball in the 1960s. It's kind of funny, I said that old school Phillies fans should know who he is, and they should because he spent 15 years there. He didn't come up with the Phillies, though. He actually came up with the Cubs in 1958. And he really didn't play well his rookie year. He only hit .235 with 6 homers and 27 RBIs. Now, he stole 21 bags. Taylor had underrated legs. He could make you pay. But that was all he did well his rookie year. Then his sophomore year, we saw glimpses of what he could do. He hit .280 with 8 homers and 38 RBIs. He never had a lot of power. But he was a guy who would hover around .250, .260. In 1960, Taylor made his only All-Star game. But he wouldn't do it with the Cubs. He was traded to the Phillies just 19 games into the season, along with Cal Neiman, for Ed Boucher and Don Cardwell. Neiman and Boucher you don't need to know about. You may know Boucher because he was an original Met. But that's it. They really weren't spectacular players. Cardwell had a good career. Won a World Series with the Mets in '69. Had some good seasons. Finished with a losing record, which I don't like for his career. But he had an under 4 ERA. I understand in that era it's not that good, but Cardwell was a solid pitcher. Nothing great, nothing terrible. But it's fair to say that the Phillies got the better end of that deal. Taylor paid immediate dividends for him. Like I said, he made the All-Star team that year. He hit .287 with 4 homers and 35 RBIs. He also stole 26 bags that year. That would be his career high. The year before that, he stole 23. In 1963, Taylor had one of his best seasons. He hit .281 with 5 homers and 49 RBIs, 23 steals. He'd finish 16th in NL MVP voting. I understand the power numbers don't jump out at you, but this guy could hit for a decent average and he was a sensational fielder. But the funny thing is, his fielding really didn't pick up until the 63 season. Before that, he really wasn't a good fielder. He was making about 20 errors a year. He'd have a .970 fielding percentage. He was really bad. But something changed in 63. Taylor only made 10 errors that whole year. And he had a .986 fielding percentage at second base. That's pretty darn good. And he'd hover around that range for the rest of his career. He'd retire with a career .976 fielding percentage, both at second base and as his career total. He did spend some time at third and the outfield a little bit. The sad thing about Taylor's career is that he played for a bunch of lousy Phillies teams. If you know your baseball history, you'll know that Gene Mauch was not a good clutch manager. In 64, he rode Jim Bunning and Chris Short into the ground trying to clinch a playoff spot. They ended up losing out to the Cardinals, and they would go on to beat the Yankees in 7 games in the World Series. That could have been the Phillies. Taylor could have been there. But because Mauch was so bad as a clutch manager, Taylor never made it to the playoffs as a Philly. In 1970, Taylor had a career resurgence of sorts. He had established himself as a guy who would hit .260 and would play well in the field, but in 70, Taylor must have been eating his Wheaties, because he hit .301 that year with 9 homers and 55 RBIs. All 3 of those marks are career highs for him in years that he played at least 100 games. The season after, he was traded to the Tigers, and he was a really good utility infielder for them. He hit .269 with 9 homers and 63 RBIs in his Tigers career. He only had 19 steals. His legs had betrayed him a little bit, but he was still a wizard in the field. He finished his career with the Phillies. He came back in 1974 and retired in 1976. Like I said, really good utility infielder. In his prime, he was one of the better second basemen in all of baseball. He's on the Phillies Wall of Fame, and rightfully so. May he rest in peace. Alright, it's time to finish up the first round of Decades of Dumbass Decisions. Just for whatever it's worth, for the second round, I'm gonna start where the 1 and 8 seeds would be. So, if you've been keeping score, you'll see what I mean. Go on my Twitter, @RealJacobVault. Click on media. The bracket is there. You can see where the 1 seed would meet the 8 seed if that's what ends up happening. I'm going to go and finish up those matchups, then go to where the 2-7 matchups would be, then 3-6, then 4-5. But I still have to get through the first round, and this Yankees one is tough. It's the Fred McGriff trade versus Javier Vasquez. Probably my least favorite Yankee. Maybe. I don't know. He's up there, though. There have been a lot of Yankees that I have hated, I'll tell you that. First up, I'll talk about McGriff. Very few people remember that he actually was a Yankee farmhand. He was drafted in the 9th round of the 81 draft. In his first professional year, he didn't play well down in the Gulf Coast League. He went back there in 82 and played better. Hit .272 with 9 homers, 41 RBIs, and a .413 on-base percentage. Even then, he had a great eye. The Blue Jays saw something in him that they liked, and George Steinbrenner never met a young player that he didn't want to trade. So, on December 9th, 1982, McGriff was traded along with Dave Collins, Mike Morgan, and cash for Tom Dodd and Dale Murray. You know, it's funny, this trade is remembered as the Fred McGriff trade. And that's how I wrote it here. But he was probably the least accomplished guy in that trade. Dave Collins had established himself as a pretty good contact hitter. Not great, but not terrible. His 1 year as a Yankee, he had .253 with 3 homers and 25 RBIs. He stole 13 bags. Not a bad player, by any stretch. Mike Morgan spent the first couple years of his career with the Athletics, but he was sent back down because he was really overmatched in the majors. He was traded to the Yankees for Fred Stanley. Morgan, in his 1 year with the Yankees, wasn't terrible. He went 7-11 with a .437 ERA. A young pitcher like that, I mean, that's not the kind of guy who you want to give up on. But a lot of teams gave up on Mike Morgan. There's a reason that he was nicknamed the Nomad. He used to hold the record for most teams played for in a career, with 12. Octavio Dotel and Edwin Jackson later broke that record. So the Yankees gave up 3 pretty good players, at the bare minimum, in this trade. Collins was decent, Morgan would turn into a good pitcher, and Fred McGriff is a borderline Hall of Famer. In my opinion, he should be in, but he's borderline to a lot of people. Let's examine the players that the Yankees got in Tom Dodd and Dale Murray. Dodd would only have 13 at-bats in the majors, and that didn't even come for the Yankees. That came for the 1986 Baltimore Orioles. Dale Murray was a solid reliever before he got to the Yankees, but he was abysmal as a Yankee. He went 3-6 with a .473 ERA. I mean, you traded a guy who would have 2,490 hits and 493 home runs for a pitcher who would only pitch in 62 games for you. I understand that there's no way you could have known that McGriff would turn into that, but come on. You've got to do better than that. That is the epitome of a George Steinbrenner trade in the 1980s. And you may be wondering, well, Jacob, why did the Yankees need McGriff? They already had Don Mattingly. First up, Mattingly always got hurt. Probably prevented him from being a Hall of Famer. He was that good. But second up, the DH was a thing. You take a look at the guys who the Yankees had as their primary DH in the late 80s to mid 90s, it's not that great. Steve Balboni wasn't anything special. He had some decent years for the Royals, but for the Yankees, he was terrible. Bye-bye Balboni is right. He should have gone bye-bye. Kevin Moss had 2 really good seasons, and then the league learned how to pitch to him. Danny Tartabull was in the prime of his career. He had some good seasons with the Yankees, but I'd have rather had McGriff. And Ruben Sierra was solid, but again, I'd have rather had McGriff. Maybe the Yankees get past the Mariners in 95 if they have McGriff. Maybe the Yankees aren't as bad in the early 90s. We'll never know how history could have been different, but the point is, that is one of the most lopsided trades in not just Yankees history, but baseball history. It's going up against someone who, at one point, was the bane of my existence. I mean, we all learn as little kids, hate is such a strong word, don't say it, blah, blah, blah. No, I was 7 years old, and I hated Javier Vasquez. I hated him with a burning passion. In fact, I still hate him. Go back in time for a minute. The 03 Yankees had a fantastic rotation. They had 4 starters finish with at least 15 wins. Clemens went 17-9 with a 3.91 ERA. He was an all-star that year. Mussina went 17-8 with a 3.4 ERA. He, somehow, didn't make an all-star team. Andy Pettitte, 21-8 with a 4.02 ERA. God only knows how he didn't make the all-star team that year. And David Wells, the weak link, he only went 15-7 with a 4.14 ERA. He didn't deserve to be an all-star, but he was a really good pitcher for the Yankees that year. The problem was, 3 of those guys were free agents. Clemens had announced before the 03 season ended that he was going to retire. Okay, fine, right off into the sunset. He had a fantastic career. David Wells, there were some concerns that he was going to fall off, but he was worth bringing back if he wanted to come back and give it one more season, which he wanted to do. In fact, he wanted to give it 4 more seasons. Andy Pettitte was a free agent in the prime of his career. The Yankees had to bring him back. If they weren't going to bring back Wells, they needed to bring back Pettitte. They needed at least one lefty in that rotation. Every team does. Instead, Wells goes to the Padres, and Pettitte links up with his hometown team, the Houston Astros. Wells, they knew they weren't going to bring back. That's why they traded for Kevin Brown. That and to get Jeff Weaver off the team. Clemens, they knew was going to retire. That's why they had John Lieber waiting in the wings. Pettitte caught them off guard. So the same day that Pettitte signed with the Astros, the Yankees traded for Vasquez. They traded Randy Choate, Nick Johnson, and Juan Rivera for him. Choate had a good year for the Yankees in 01, but he had fallen off a cliff after that. I don't begrudge the Yankees for trading him. Nick Johnson always got hurt, drew a lot of walks, was hyped up to be a key part of the Yankees' future, but again, he could never stay healthy. No big loss. Juan Rivera had shown some promise. He was probably the guy who, it was toughest to see go. But I understood the need to stabilize the rotation. Vasquez was coming off some really good years with the Expos. In 2003, he went 13-12 with a 3.24 ERA. In his last 4 years with the Expos, Vasquez never pitched less than 217 innings. The Yankees thought they were getting a reliable pitcher. I thought they were getting a reliable pitcher. Instead, Javier Vasquez laid an egg, the likes of which I've never seen before. Oh, Jacob, what are you talking about? He made an all-star team in 2004. You're over-exaggerating. Okay, look. Vasquez had a really good first half. I'll give you that. It looked like the Yankees had actually found something. And I didn't hate the trade at the time. I actually thought it was going to work. Did I love the rotation that year? No, but I thought they had some decent pitchers there. They still had Mussina. Lieber, I thought, was going to come back and do well, and he did. Vasquez showed no signs to me that he wouldn't succeed in New York. They had traded for Kevin Brown. They had Jose Contreras. I was okay with the rotation. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. But going back to the first half, there's no question that Vasquez had a great first half. He went 10-5 with a 3.56 ERA, which makes what happened in the second half that much more infuriating. He fell off a cliff. This is when I started to hate him. See, I let myself believe that this guy could be a huge part of a World Series winning Yankee team. Go back and look at the 2004 stats. Mike Mussina was not good. He went 12-9 with a 4.59 ERA. Kevin Brown got hurt. Contreras wasn't anything special. They brought back El Duque in spring training, and that was nice. But how much could you really rely on him, is what I was thinking. The Yankees needed Vasquez to step up if they were going to do anything in 2004. And he didn't. Like I said, one of the worst streaks in not just Yankee history, baseball history. In the second half of 2004, Javier Vasquez went 4-5 with just under a 7 ERA. Every time he took the mound, you cringed. You knew the Yankees were going to have their work cut out for him if they were going to win that game. But he could have erased all of it if he had pitched well in the playoffs. Let's take a look and see what Vasquez did in the playoffs in 2004. He started Game 4 of the ALDS. He went 5 innings and gave up 5 runs. Now, the Yankees did win that game. But Javier Vasquez had a 9 ERA in that game. Okay? That's not good. They won that game in the 11th inning. Thank you, Alex Rodriguez. Vasquez comes in relief in Game 3 of the 2004 ALCS. That's the 19-8 game. He goes 4 1/3 and gives up 4 runs. He's credited with the win. Because the Yankees put up 19 runs, Vasquez got the win. Didn't deserve it. Game 7. The first pitch that Vasquez throws in relief of Kevin Brown, Johnny Damon hits over the right field wall for a grand slam, icing the game for the Red Sox. If I wasn't already done with Javier Vasquez, I was done with him then. And I'll give Brian Cashman credit. He traded Vasquez that offseason for Randy Johnson. Now, I really liked Johnson as a Yankee. In his 2 seasons with the Yankees, he finished with 17 wins, pitched over 200 innings, was still a strikeout machine. Great job by Brian Cashman in getting something of value for Vasquez. I thought I was done with this guy. I thought I never had to think of him again. Then, the 2009 offseason hits. The Yankees are defending their World Series. They make a trade that I didn't like for Curtis Granderson. I was a big Austin Jackson fan. I really wanted to see him in pinstripes. The Yankees traded for Granderson, so I never really liked him. I understand that Granderson had some good moments with the Yankees, but I was never crazy about him because I really liked Austin Jackson. The second trade that Cashman made, I remember exactly where I was. I was in 7th grade. It was free time, so I'm on the computer. I go on foxsports.com to edit my fantasy football team. And I see Yankees make trade. Immediately, I click on the story. And I see it's for Javier Vasquez. You have no idea how close I was to throwing that computer out the window. I was so furious. I knew he was going to fail with the Yankees. I didn't care that he had sort of kind of turned his career around after he left. I saw him in '04. I didn't like him in '04. I didn't want him back. To make matters worse, the Yankees gave up 2 solid players in that deal. They gave up Mike Dunn, who was really nothing, has never really accomplished much in the majors. They traded Melky Cabrera, who I really liked, big contributor for the '09 team, and they traded Arodys Vizcaíno, a guy who's actually turned into a solid reliever. Really, really good setup guy. The Yankees also got Boone Logan in that deal, and Logan, it took him a while to get going as a Yankee, but when he got going, he didn't stop. I liked Logan. I called him the Boonmeister. But the trade was for Vasquez. The Yankees needed another starter. They really only had 3 starters they could count on in '09. Sabathia, Burnett, and Pettit. So the Yankees made the move for Vasquez. Javier Vasquez was somehow worse in 2010 than he was in '04. He went 10-10 with a 5.32 ERA. He finished the year out of the bullpen. My lasting memory of him that year is him going up against the Seattle Mariners. I was sitting in right field, home run territory, second deck. Balls never came my way, but if a ball had landed in my lap, it would have been a home run. Russell Branyan is the batter. He hits a shot off of Javier Vasquez that ends up in, I think it was the 4th or 5th deck of right field. I mean, I literally just craned my head up. Like, that's the longest home run I've ever seen. I mean, it was a moonshot. Find the clip if you can. I think it's on YouTube. Javier Vasquez is worse than the McGriff trade. He just is. You know, as great as McGriff was, realistically, would the Yankees have done anything with him in the early 90s? Probably not. They could have, but it's unlikely. And 95, yeah, maybe they would have gotten past the Mariners, but would they have gotten past the Indians? The Indians were a great team that year. Vasquez is a million times worse. Moving on now to the Islanders, we have Little Brother versus the Marty McGinnis trade. What is Little Brother? Good question. The Islanders have always been the little brother to the Rangers. They've always played second fiddle. From arena to free agents to coaches to records, the Rangers have always been better. Even ownership. As much heat as Jim Dolan gets as owner of the Knicks, and he deserves every bit of it, he's been a great owner for the Rangers. Because he stays out of the way. But he knows to stay out of the way for hockey. So, give him credit for Rangers owner. Don't give him credit for Knicks owner. The Islanders had a cheapskate for the longest time. Charles Wang. I mean, this is all throughout my lifetime. The Islanders have had so precious few moments where they've been better than the Rangers. I mean, the old joke used to be that the Islanders would beat the Rangers in the regular season, but they would never make the playoffs. The Rangers were the one team they could beat, but they couldn't beat anyone else. That's what we hung our hat on as Islander fans, the fact that we would win the season series. I mean, arenas, for God's sake. The Rangers play at Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena. The Islanders, all throughout my lifetime, have played at dumps. Nassau Coliseum, dump. Barclays Center, dump for hockey. Hopefully the Belmont Arena is great, and I think it will be. Free agents. Tell me the biggest outside free agent to sign with the Islanders. Anders Lee doesn't count. Because realize, he was an Islander. He just re-signed. Who's the biggest one? Mikhail Grabovski? Nikolai Kulemin? I'm begging you, somebody tell me who! Meanwhile, the Rangers always get the big free agents. The Chris Drurys, the Scott Gomez's, the Wade Reddins, the Kevin Shattenkirks, guys they don't even need, Brad freaking Richards, Artemi Panarin. Every freaking year, the Rangers get a big free agent, the Islanders get nothing. The Rangers, for the longest time, were always in the playoffs. They had a stretch from 2006 to 2017, when I was growing up, where they made the playoffs in 11 out of those 12 seasons. The Islanders, in that same time frame, only made the playoffs 4 times. And while the Rangers were making deep runs, in that time span, the Islanders only won 1 playoff series. You take a look at the coaches. The Rangers make a big move to get John Tortorella. Who do the Islanders get? They get AHL coaches. They get Scott Gordon and Jack Capuano. Oh, but Jacob, why aren't you putting this for the Jets or the Nets? They're little brothers too. You're right in a very broad sense of the term, but you're wrong in the way that I'm interpreting it. In order for it to be a real big brother, little brother relationship in sports, the big brother has to take something from the little brother. What have the Giants taken from the Jets? Yes, they have 07. Yes, they have 11. But recently, the Jets have been better than the Giants. Not by much, but they have been better. Also, football is so week to week in this town. I mean, one week, if you win, You're at the top of the world. You're making the Super Bowl. All that. And if you lose the next week, oh, that's it. We're going to end up losing out. Forget about it. Fire the coach. Fire everyone. It's a little different for football. Yeah, it didn't help that the Jets played at Giants Stadium. But, again, there were periods where the Jets were better than the Giants. Were the Giants getting the back page? Yeah, but the Jets were winning where it counted. I don't count the Jets-Giants rivalry as a true little brother-big brother rivalry. And Nets-Knicks is absolutely not little brother, big brother. The Nets, for starters, are not the little brother anymore. Okay? As of right now, the Knicks are probably the little brother. Alright? Realize, the Nets are in Orlando, the Knicks aren't. The Nets have been successful recently, the Knicks haven't. The Nets got Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. The Knicks got Julius Randle and Bobby Portis. There is no little brother, big brother relationship between the Nets and the Knicks. Can that change? Maybe, but it's going to be tough. That's why I just have this for the Islanders, because it just permeates everything they do. That's going up against the Marty McGinnis trade. Most of you may not remember this, but Marty McGinnis actually came up with the Islanders. He spent his first 5.5 seasons with the Islanders and played really well. I mean, he looked like he could be a really good first or second liner of the future. But in a stroke of genius, Mike Milbury trades him to the Flames for Robert Reichel. Reichel only spent 2 total seasons with the Islanders. If you combine all the games he played, it equals 164, so that's 2 seasons. Reichel was a guy who put up a lot of points. He wasn't a bad player for the Islanders, he just wasn't McGinnis. You feel a little more affinity for your homegrown guys. And McGinnis was developed by the Islanders. He was an 8th round pick in 1988. The Islanders developed him and they turned him into a really good NHLer. McGinnis had a really good career. So did Reichel. Reichel's underrated, but I feel like McGinnis was the better player, having watched those old games. Truthfully, if I was doing this 1 through 16, the McGinnis trade would be 16th because Reichel really wasn't a bad player. But I did it alphabetically, so it's the 9th seed, but it doesn't even come close to Little Brother. Moving over to the Jets, we have Bill Belichick resigning versus Dan Marino's fake spike. We all know the story, or at least you should. Belichick was the head coach in waiting for the Jets when Bill Parcells was gonna call it quits. Finally, after the 99th season, Parcells decides to step aside. Belichick is the hand-chosen successor, and he writes on a napkin, "I resign as HC of NYJ." Now, the argument then becomes, how great would the Jets have been with Belichick? The answer is, they would have been the Patriots. Realize something. Belichick was in charge of the war room when the Patriots drafted Brady. If Belichick was in charge of the Jets' war room, the Jets would have drafted Brady. They had an old quarterback in Testaverde. Brady would have taken over and would have been Brady for the Jets. The Jets could have had 6 Super Bowl rings. I mean, the question that some people ask is, if the Jets had taken Brady in the 5th round, how good would the Jets have been? They would have been really good, but they could have had both Brady and Belichick. If Belichick doesn't resign, the Jets are the kings of the AFC East for the vast majority of my lifetime. That's going up against Dan Marino's fake spike, one of the most iconic plays in regular season NFL history. Yeah, we know the Tuck rule, and we know the Malcolm Butler interception. We know the no call in NOLA and all that stuff. The Marino fake spike, though, for happening in a November game, it has stood the test of time. If you don't know the backstory, it was November 27th, 1994. The Jets entered that game with a 6-5 record, a real chance of making the playoffs. I'm not saying a loss against Miami would have sunk their playoff hopes, but a win would have obviously helped them a lot. Dan Marino found Mark Ingram for a touchdown 4 times. For whatever reason, the Jets just could not stop him. I'm not saying that Mark Ingram was a bad player by any stretch. Mark Ingram was a really good player. It's easy to see where his son got it from. But this guy wasn't Jerry Rice or Isaac Bruce or Terrell Owens or Randy Moss. There's no excuse for him to get 4 touchdowns in a single game against you. He only had 6 that whole season. 4 of them came against the Jets in that one game. And to make matters worse, all those touchdowns occurred in the second half. The Jets had a 17-0 lead in the third quarter, and they blew it. They were up 24-6 at one point. They gave up 22 unanswered points. All of them came on Mark Ingram touchdowns. And the final one is just so infuriating as a Jets fan. The Dolphins are running up to the line. Everyone thinks they're going to spike it. The Jets think they're going to spike it. The only people who knew that the Dolphins weren't going to spike it were the Dolphins. Marino fakes the spike, throws the game-winning touchdown to Ingram. The Jets fall to 6-6. Okay, no biggie. It's just a November football game. How bad could it have been? The Jets, after that game, lost 4 straight. So, they lost 5 straight games to end the 94 season. The coach of the 94 Jets was Pete Carroll. Because Carroll went on that big losing streak, he was fired and was replaced by Rich Kotite. We all know how bad Kotite was. He advanced in this. But he never would have been a Jet if not for that fake spike. I think that fake spike took a lot out of him. It was really demoralizing. After that game, the Jets only scored 36 points in their final 4 games. They were lifeless. And you can trace it all back to the fake spike. But as bad as that is, Belichick resigning is worse. Because it's, again, the Jets could have been the Patriots. The Jets could have taken Brady, Belichick would have been the coach, and the Jets could have had 6 Super Bowl rings. Moving on now to the Brooklyn Nets, the last matchup of the first round. We have the Julius Erving trade versus Kenyon Martin walking. Julius Erving, we all know the story. Probably the best net in history. led them to 2 ABA titles, but the Nets trade him before they get into the NBA. They send him to the Sixers for, in essence, $6 million. The backstory is a little more interesting. The Nets were slated to come into the NBA as one of the 4 ABA teams that would join the NBA in the merger. The Knicks owned the territorial rights to where the Nets played. So the Knicks demanded just under $5 million. Roy Bowe was the Nets owner. He didn't have the money. So Bowe got a little creative. Instead of going to a bank and taking out a loan, he decided to sell Julius Erving's contract. He originally offered the contract to the Knicks in exchange for waiving the fee, but the Knicks said no. The Knicks could have had Julius Erving if they had just forgotten about the $4.8 million. But instead, they wanted the money. Bowe shopped Erving around. Eventually, he got an offer he couldn't refuse from the Sixers. The Nets would get $6 million for Erving. It would more than cover the territorial fee. So the Nets really had no choice but to trade Erving, but it still hurts to let him go. I don't understand why he couldn't just go to a bank. That's going up against Kenyon Martin walking. Another instance of Nets ownership being cheap. Martin was coming off his rookie deal. He had been the first overall pick in 2000. A bad draft, but Martin turned into a really good player. He was an integral part of their 3 playoff teams. He made an all-star team his last season as a Net, the only one he would make. He averaged 15 points with the Nets to go with 7.5 rebounds and 2.5 assists. He was also really good defensively. Martin wanted to come back to the Nets, but Nets ownership got cheap. They didn't want to pay him. If memory serves, they didn't even make him an offer. They traded him to the Nuggets in a sign-and-trade that got the Nets 3 first-rounders. If Kenyon Martin stays a Net, there's a really strong chance that the Nets make some more noise in the playoffs than they did. Think about this starting lineup. Jason Kidd, Vince Carter, Richard Jefferson, Kenyon Martin, and the Nad Kristich. While Kristich wouldn't be mistaken for Elton Brand or Shaquille O'Neal, if he's the worst player in your starting lineup and you have those 4 guys playing with him, that sounds pretty good. The Nets could have made a lot of noise in the playoffs with them. But Nets ownership got cheap. They decided not to pay him. Just like Roy Bowe, all those years ago, decided to get cheap and sell Julius Erving so he could have the Nets move into the NBA. Julius Erving is a better player than Kenyon Martin, so Erving advances. I hope you have a good weekend. You can watch some baseball. We've survived. We've gotten through this. There will be sports next week. And I promise you, I'm going to be here to break it all down. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this. It really means a lot. This hasn't been easy, but now that we're getting sports back, no matter how bizarre it's going to be without fans, it'll be nice to have the games back. It's going to be so much fun watching the Yankees. I don't care that the season has an asterisk on it. I just want to see the Yankees play. I mean, it's just that simple. Until Monday, I am Jacob Valk saying, bye, buckaroos.